If you watched my previous video, you'll know that my Nano Goblin met its untimely demise, and I had planned to use some of the electronics in a new Nano Goblin build. But when the electronics sound like this, you start to look to other options, as well as with the flight controller being sort of not in the greatest state with the negative pads being ripped off. I didn't really want to have to splice and solder wires together just to fit onto that pad, so we'll be going with a new flight controller. In addition, when I took the old Nano Goblin apart, I found some damage on an internal component on the ESC, and so we won't be reusing that one either, but that's okay. It leaves room for upgrades. So here for the servos, I decided to use an Emax ES3059MD. It's a 9-gram Metal Gear digital servo, so all around just a big upgrade. I had debated going with a bit more pricey 5-gram servos that have comparable performance to this one, but they were like $50 a servo, where I could get these for like a little over $10 each, and it's not a huge compromise. Maybe a tiny bit more weight, but it really doesn't make a big difference. And I did keep the old Nano Goblin frame just to make sure that the servos would fit, and they do seem to fit nice and snug and don't protrude out of the airfoil at all. I was pretty impressed with how almost made for it they were once I cut out some foam. Truly nothing sticking out. I do have plans to use some leftover push rods I have from an old Dolphin build. I did redesign the elevons. The previous design didn't really work all that well, and so this has a double horn system to attach the push rod to, and I think that's just going to be an overall much better system for moving the control surfaces and far more reliable, but time will tell, so we will see. I didn't like the push rod sticking out and just sort of the whole clasping of the control rod system and that comes with the Nano Goblin, so I won't even bother with it. I'll just we'll deal with the push rods only. Another decision I had to make was to stick with 4S or decide to go a different route. The motor was still good, however, I did have a nice 6S battery on hand, and so I think we're going to retire this 1100 milliamp battery and just upgrade to 6S for this Nano Goblin build. I have an 880 milliamp hour 6S lithium high volt battery, and the motor of choice is this 1507 Ethix 2800 kV Flatrat V2 motor. I will be using the same prop I used on the 4S setup. I might swap it out, but overall I will be expecting slightly more speed out of this motor, which is good because we got to work on the elevons. In order to upgrade these elevons, we need to clear out the old ones and make sure we have a good surface for the tape to adhere to the new ones. Now that the elevons are gone, we're good to move on to starting to assemble this plane instead of dismantling it. So we'll get our fresh bottle of E6000 and start gluing. First thing I really want to do is to get that spar in place. We'll put a good bead of E6000 below where the spar is supposed to go, and just get it set in where it's supposed to be. There's not a ton of pressure here on this first glue. We just need to get this spar solidly in place, so we'll let it sit for a little bit and get solidified. While that spar is drying, we can go ahead and get started on the motor mounts here. It's just 2 wooden plates that secure to the back of the foam here. I really like this design. It allows you to quickly change the motor that's mounted to a carbon plate that slides in between the two of them. Really just a little bit of glue there, and they're in place. One thing to keep in mind on this step is to put the set screws underneath the motor plate before you glue it in place, otherwise you'll have to take it apart like I had to. Here I'm mounting up the motor, mostly so I can get the CG right when I put things together. With the motor mounted, we can now move on to getting the wings finalized. I'll glue the top piece of foam that locks in the spar. Really here, I want to make sure I have good coverage on the foam. I don't want really any surface that's not on the servo wire channel to not have glue, and that's just going to help me keep a good solid joint here and make sure it's nice and firm. I'll later go over and trim that piece to make sure it's as flat as possible on the airfoil and put a piece of tape over it. Now that the wings are all put together, we can start on gluing the fuselage together. This is where I kind of prefer the way the flick is set up, where it's mostly just a few pieces of foam. The two halves having to glue them together makes it a little bit more complicated, but we're going to use plenty of E6000 and make sure we get it into the keyed dimples there and spread it around in the same fashion that we did on the wing. Here I'm using some of my battery bags to make sure I have just plenty of weight on that fuselage so it can get set properly. I left it for several hours here at this point just to make sure the seam between the two halves of the fuselage were good and set and solid. Now we can admire the aftermath of putting together this plane. It really did involve quite a fair amount of trimming foam, and with the foam being the way it is, it just sort of gets everywhere. So definitely a big mess, but that's just how it is when you build planes. Lots of tape, lots of foam, and just lots of random things here and there that just get left out. And yeah, so I'll be spending some time in the future cleaning up for sure. And here is the Nano Goblin in its current state. I'm waiting to tape the elevons on and get the vertical fins on there, as well as I'm still trying to figure out which direction I want to go in with the video transmitter, but it does seem to balance out well with that 6S pack in the nose. So anyway, make sure to watch the part 2 of this to see me finish up this build and get into the air. So thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed this kind of video. Thanks.